One man against 24 guns, holding the line for 15 minutes. This was destined to be an unfair fight, but he decided to turn the hunting ground into his own home field. Looking at the preparations before the battle, a 1-ton oil barrel tightly strapped down, roadside trenches reinforced with steel frames, sandbags in the forest forming the final line of defense, wire and screws turned into a storm of death. On the road ahead, landmines had already been planted. In 2 months, he turned his home into a giant trap. As the enemy convoy was blown up by the explosives, Ben quickly opened fire on them. Bullets drilled into the windows like they had eyes. Some men had not even touched the door, and were already pinned to their seats. But could this lightning strike really change his certain death situation? Very soon, the enemy set up an astonishing firepower net by the stone wall, forcing Ben to retreat into the first floor of the house. One squad was responsible for the assault. Another by the stone wall provided cover. Even though they could no longer see Ben, they still kept firing without saving bullets. At this moment, Ben had already reached the basement. After sealing the entrance hatch, he immediately set a booby trap below. Anyone who lifted the floor would be greeted by a grand explosion. He then deliberately left his phone in the basement below. As expected, when the soldiers checked the terminal in their hands, they thought Ben was still hiding in the house. They had no idea he had already escaped through an underground passage to the other side of the cover. The moment he climbed out of the ground, the soldiers inside also lifted the floor. A huge mushroom cloud swallowed the wooden house. Compared to the earlier landmines, this explosion truly deserved to be called art. The soldiers inside were instantly wiped out. Ben also easily achieved a double kill and became famous. But when he glanced at his watch, there were still more than 7 minutes left on the countdown. The joy of victory froze instantly. He could only force himself to keep fighting. A gunshot rang out. One enemy dropped immediately, but that shot also acted like a lighthouse, illuminating his position for all remaining enemies. The squad by the stone wall immediately moved, while the main force rushed directly toward him. The enemy firepower was extremely fierce. Bullets kept hitting the dirt mound. Ben was pressed down so hard he could not even raise his head. On the surface, he looked completely suppressed, but in reality, everything was part of his plan. Just as several soldiers closed in within 1 step, he decisively pressed the detonator again. The explosion sent several people flying, and made the others hesitate to rush forward. They could only hide behind cover and fire at Ben. But at that moment, Ben noticed soldiers approaching from the left forest. The front was blocked. The flank was threatened. This place could no longer be held. So he grabbed a magazine, and while defending himself, he moved toward the second position. But just as he left cover, he was shot in the back. This shot disrupted everything. The retreat turned into a race against death. Relying on muscle memory, he sprinted toward the prearranged sniper position in the forest. At this time, only 3 minutes remained. Using his elevated position advantage, Ben fired continuously at the enemies below, taking down several in an instant. But enemies on the flank were already closing in, and the wound from the earlier sprint was tearing open. Pain kept tearing at his nerves. Ben could no longer hold his weapon steady. Facing the approaching enemies, he could only pull the pin and throw the grenade downward. But for such a large number of enemies, it was far from enough. Ben was still trapped in a heavy encirclement. Given the situation, he should not be able to escape. More importantly, he could no longer even lift his gun. He could only watch as enemies approached, aimed at him, just as Ben prepared to accept death. Lieutenant Liss arrived with Navy SEALs like divine reinforcements, a familiar figure, and a reassuring formation. The squad unleashed full firepower, quickly eliminating all enemies. Ben ultimately survived. This 15-minute solo battle had long gone beyond life and death. It was one man using sheer willpower to turn a desperate situation into a legend.